Hey, everybody. This is Jeff and Marcus. We wanted to take a minute to record what we're going to be looking at for this coming Saturday's game against the Ohio Village Muffins. We're super excited to be hosting them. It is the first time they have come to Greenfield Village since 2005. They have been to the Village, from what we can document, twice, and the La-Di-Das are 0-2 against them. So we want to, we certainly are excited to welcome them. They're a Midwest vintage baseball team with a long and storied history. Been around since 1981. And so we want to, take appreciation for what they have done for us, at the same time what they've done for vintage baseball. And so as a result, we're going to be playing by rules that are more comfortable to them, which is the rules of 1860 as opposed to our normal 1867 game. For us, who are excited about presenting history, this is a really cool thing that we're doing here. It's a nice change. It's something different. And at the same token, we want to make sure that we're presenting it in a way that is befitting of all the history and the research that we have done as a program. So, we want to show not only can we do 1867 right, but we can do 1860 right also. So, Marcus and I are going to talk differences here. The first few we're going to move through kind of fast, but the fact that it's 1860, that means we're playing by the bound rule. We're going to put a little more onto that here. So I'll talk real quickly. Section 1, 1860 rules about the difference in the ball. We're not totally sure which ball we're going to use. We're going to determine that at game time. An 1860 ball is about half an ounce heavier and half an inch bigger in circumference. But again, we'll see what it's like when we get out there. Section 5 is about the pitcher's line. Marcus, tell us about the difference between where the pitcher is going to pitch with this 12-foot line versus our normal 6-foot lines.
Yeah, so, we're used to having 2 lines for the pitcher that are 4 feet apart, and the pitcher is supposed to stay within those lines. Now, that doesn't always happen. We often step over it, but the rule was the pitcher was supposed to operate from within those lines. But in 1860, there was no back line. There was only the single front line. It's still at 45 feet, the same as our front line is now. So sometimes pitchers would take a little bit of a running start, a little bit like what you might see in cricket today, even though they were still delivering the ball in the same way, underhanded, straight arm. But the other thing about it is our line is 6 feet across, meaning that you can be 3 feet off of center when you bring the ball in, if you want to bring it at a little bit of an angle. Here in 1860, that line is 12 feet. So the pitcher can actually be 6 feet off of center and bring the ball in on a pretty strong angle to try to force a hitter into hitting in a different way. That line got shorter last year in 1866. And then the back line was introduced around 1863, I believe. But we're only going to have the one line for this game on Saturday.
So we've got just one line at the 45-foot pitcher point. So the pitcher isn't actually pitching any further away than normal. They can still be at the 45-foot line. So if we're saving chalk on a second line, Marcus, tell us about how we're saving chalk from the home to first and home to third too.
Well, we're saving chalk a lot, actually. As we know from baseball in all of our years, it's easier for the umpire to judge whether a ball is fair or foul when there's a line on the ground that you can see, and you can look and see if it even brings up chalk, or you can see where the ball landed on one side or the other of the line. But in 1860, they hadn't yet gotten to that point of chalking the lines from home on out. And even in 1867, they only chalked the lines from home to first and from home to third. Today, of course, we chalk it all the way out to the end of the field. But here in 1860, they weren't required to chalk that line at all. Most places didn't. So the umpire was making the judgment call based on their view from home to the base. Sometimes they would have foul flags. They weren't required. But so the umpire is having to make a significant judgment. And on close plays, it's just going to be the umpire's judgment. And we live with that. And certainly for the players, we don't want anybody to be complaining about that. The umpire's doing the best call that they can, given that there is not yet any marking there. The other place there's not any marking necessarily is the striker's line. We mark the striker's line with chalk, but it's not required to be marked with chalk in 1860. The line was often called the scratch. And so a lot of evidence, some of the things Mr. Hunkley has put together over the years really suggest that essentially the umpire marked that line by dragging the bat through the ground, right? Just making a mark in the dirt. And so we're likely to not have a striker's line in chalk. We'll just do what was more common in 1860 and just mark it. The line is there, but it's in some ways more of a line that we imagine, or a much less rigid placement of the line than it would become later on. And then still later on as we got to batter's boxes and all of those things. So here it's just going to be scratch in the dirt, and that's what we'll go with.
All right, so it's going to be one line at the pitcher's point, 45 feet away, and not officially a chalk line. So the field's going to look a little bit different, but not enough to really, take away from any of the game here. And it is going to put a little more emphasis on the umpire to make a, judgment call. But Marcus, we know that there's one less thing that the umpire has to call here, and that is no balls, right?
Correct. So the idea of called strikes, that was created in 1858. So we will be having called strikes, even though they were quite rare. The idea there was that there were times where people would delay the game by not swinging at pitches because there was no penalty. There are accounts of players, of hitters, taking 80 pitches and just saying, oh, no, that was no good. Usually that happened when it was getting dark or when it was getting ready to rain, to try to delay the game to ensure that your team would win. So that was 1858. Then we started to realize in 1864, one, pitchers could do a little bit the similar thing, but also pitchers were trying hard to pitch as fast as they could. And as Jeff can certainly attest, until you've got some good practice in, trying to pitch harder often causes you to lose control. Yep. And so balls were just going everywhere. So called balls were initiated in 1864. In 1860, for the game on Saturday, yes, called strikes, no called balls.
Okay. So you mentioned the swift pitching. Should we still expect by 1860 our pitchers pitching swiftly in 1860?
This is a great question. And we know that there were a few who really were. And there were accounts of pitchers pitching with, quote, exceeding velocity. Well, what exactly does that mean? Certainly there were no radar guns at the time, but faster than people were used to. And of course, I always joke when I'm announcing on the Hill, the first great superstar of baseball, everybody knows him, Jim Creighton. And Jim Creighton was a pitcher. He was really identified as the first who could bring the ball very swiftly with control. And when pitchers tried to do that, afterwards, they were often called would-be Creightons when they brought it fast, but without control. So I suspect we won't see terribly swift pitching, but it wouldn't have been feeder pitching. Just in that way.
Okay. And I think this kind of leads to the idea of, utilizing that 12-foot line there. Well, right. Speed may not necessarily be, a supreme thing. I'm sure you'll see at least the La-Di-Da's pitcher will be better ranging themselves from the left side to the right side to be able to try to change eye level, maybe a little bit of a velocity change there. But I suspect there will be a better utilization of that, not necessarily somebody just pouring gas down the pitcher's lane there. So we're not. So things that may not necessarily be changing, we're probably not going to change the stealing that we do here. That's one of our rules. So we wouldn't expect any steal change going on there. We would expect to see all the defensive players playing at a places where they feel most comfortable, that they don't necessarily have to feel tethered to one particular spot, which I think kind of adds to the to the strategy of the game to kind of see where the player's playing.
I think we will see from the Muffins, most likely. I suspect we'll see the shortstop moving quite a bit around the field. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see the second baseman playing a little bit closer to the base and their shortstop going to fill the hole on the second base side when a lefty hitter comes up to bat. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Certainly that was happening, but it was not mandated or even the constant norm.
Okay. Before we get into the big rule that we want to dedicate to, we want to talk about the ideas of the dead ball and what happens when spectators touch the ball or handle the ball, or a ball is otherwise declared dead. We've got our way of doing it, which we follow the rules in 67 about whether the pitcher has to be in the box or it just has to be held by the pitcher. Marcus, can you walk us through 1860, what a dead ball rule would look like to make a ball dead go alive again?
The big thing that we deal with in 1867 is on a foul ball, the ball goes to the pitcher wherever the pitcher may be. The pitcher can even run to the base and take the foul ball. But if it's a dead ball that goes into the crowd and somebody picks it up or stops it, then it has to go to the pitcher in the pitcher's area, in the pitcher's box. That's a rule that was created in 1866. And so here in 1860, what we'll be doing on Saturday, everything it just has to go to the pitcher anywhere. So the idea of having to be in the box is not yet created. So even if it's a ball that goes into the crowd, all it has to do is go to the pitcher anywhere to be made live again.
Okay. So the idea of the pitcher running to the box or get it to the pitcher in the box, there's not really a box to be had there. Right, you can't really get him into the box since there is no box. It's just kind of a line there. Yep. All right. So the last one, and this is the big change, and this is one that not only is a major rule change, but it's also going to be it's going to change a lot in the ideology, and that's the change from what we normally play by in 67, what we kind of call the fly rule, to 1860, the bound rule. So Marcus, walk us through what does it mean and how did it come to be?
So up until 1864, a ball anywhere on the field, fair or foul, could be caught on one bound or bounce and be an out. Starting in 1865, that rule changed, and that came the game that we play, which is that a fair ball has to be caught on the fly, but a foul ball can still be caught on one bound or bounce for an out. So we'll be playing the 1860 rules on Saturday, meaning one bound or bounce anywhere on the field is an out. So a couple of things happen there. If it is you can still catch it in the air. It's perfectly legitimate to do that.
And manly.
What's that?
And manly.
Yes, it's manly. The advantage of doing that is it's just like 1867 or even today. If you catch the ball on the fly, the runners have to return to their base and tag up before they can attempt to advance. That's unchanged. But on a ball that is caught on one bounce, the striker who hit it is out immediately, but the runners can continue to advance without having to tag up. They advance at their peril, but there's no requirement to go back and tag up. So they can run immediately in that case. And the place that when I see 1867 players play 1860, they sometimes put people out and don't realize it. Like imagine a sharply hit ball that hits the ground once and the third baseman picks it up. That's an out. But frequently that third baseman will go to throw it over to first base. not realizing that that was a bound catch. So you want to be attuned to that and make sure you're not trying to throw the ball around when you don't need to, or leading to the next point, not making another out you could have made.
Especially when you think about, like, if a person is on base and somebody hits that, a one hopper to the infielder, your initial instinct in a 67 is, I got to go. But if that's a one hop right to the shortstop who catches it, you don't have to go anymore. That out was made behind you.
Have to go. You
the
can
runner
return to the base.
Yep, the runner does not have to go at that point. And so as a runner, you have to be in tune with how many times did it bounce before, I have to, like you said, Marcus, you can advance, but it is at your own risk. Right. So if the play is right in front of you, you best hold tune there. So what about, we've got a runner on first, what about instances of first and second or bases loaded? How do we handle ground balls or one bounce plays like that?
So this is the force question, yes?
Yes, it is.
So this is one of the things that where I love that we do the historic research that we do, and not just us at Greenville Village, but the community of vintage baseballists, because the wording of the rule didn't change a bit between 1860 and 1864. But the way they interpreted the rule around force outs did change. And we know that because we read the historical accounts, we read the old versions of the rules. And so today, if, say there's men on first and second, the hit goes to the second baseman who fields it as a grounder, and he steps on second base. Now the runner from first is out. If he wants to try to make a play on the runner at third, that runner is no longer forced. So that runner could return to second, or he could go on to third. But if you're going to make a play on him, because it's not a force, you have to tag him. In 1860, there was a lot of controversy about this. And the question was, does the force remain in effect throughout the play? And the answer for tomorrow, the answer for Saturday is, yes, it does. So in that situation that I just described, the runner from first to second is forced out. You can then throw to third, and by simply holding the ball on the base, force out that runner because the force remains in effect. Now, the runner could still try to return to second because that base is vacant, but he can still be put out on the force without a tag. And so we need to remember that both in terms of offense and defense. Mm-hmm. Because it will sneak up on you. You won't necessarily realize, I don't have to make the tag. I don't have to think about what order were the outs made. This does not come into play, though, if it is, like, say it was that hit we mentioned earlier, a sharp hit, it bounces once, gets caught by the shortstop. That's not the case that the force remains on. It's only on a grounder that or a ball that has not been caught in the air or on one bounce. It has to bounce twice, in which case that force remains on.
So a lot of thinking's got to be done. Baseball is a thinking person's game. We always have to be thinking. We always have to be conscious of what is going on in one of the situations here. Marcus, I want to end on this one here because I know that you know. How would Henry Chadwick have felt about the bound rule?
Early on, he was not particularly in a strong feeling camp about it, but he very quickly moved into the camp of, we need to get rid of the bound rule. And he was often surprised. Like if you read the newspaper accounts leading up to the convention that was held in 1860 in March, where they set the rules for the 1860 season, the newspaper said, one of the rules that's going to be adopted this year is that you have to catch the ball in the air for an out. They were certain that was going to be adopted as a rule. And Henry Chadwick talked about what a good idea that was. And then the clubs didn't want that. They voted against it. And every year it came up, and every year it got voted down. Henry Chadwick said to catch a ball upon the first bound is a feat of which no 10-year-old should be proud. So he wanted to see the manly catches, such as have been made by the Lottie-Dahs in the outfield. We've seen some amazing catches by our Lottie-Dah outfielders, but with Cougar and Soap Dish and a few others, and Marbles and Who, all making some amazing outfield manly catches in the last few weeks.
And I mean, it definitely changes a lot about going from fly rule to bound rule. Definitely changes a lot about where an outfielder should play. You know, as an outfielder, I know when I'm playing bound rule, I'm typically playing a few steps back further than I normally would, because I know it's a lot easier for me to jog in to be able to catch a ball on one bounce than it is to run straight back and try to get one. Now, I've been burned by, you know, hitting a ball over an outfielder's head and watching the outfielder run full bore and chase it down and catch it on the one bounce. And, you know, what turned into a 300-foot double just became a 300-foot out. And I'm sure there's a lot of that floating around in the 1860s about some
Absolutely.
of these harder hitting teams that are saying, like, you know, we really got to change this rule. We really got to do something about it.
Well, and it was interesting that part of the debate was, well, if the British can do it with cricket, why can't we do it? And the response was, why would we want to do what the British do? And so there was a lot of, it wasn't just the strategy of the game. There was also a bit of jingoism involved, and how do we want to think about this? And the interesting piece was that the convention. It was the convention of 1864, December of 1864, that made that decision. And many of the very senior clubs that wanted to keep the bound rule didn't send representatives to that convention. So the young upstart clubs that wanted the fly rule, they snuck that vote in and got it, and then it just never looked back.
Do you know if there was ever any attempt to try to change it back? I mean, there's always been a lot of change of, like, the size of the ball and the size of bats and the size of equipment and all that. Do you know if there was ever anything to say, like, now that the fly rule is put into place, have they just opened Pandora's box, or were there some clubs that said, any chance we could try to get back to the bound rule maybe?
Well, we know that the only clubs that were bound by that were clubs that were members of the National Association of Baseball Players. And even some of them ignored it. The Knickerbockers, who, by the way, very rarely played against other clubs, they played mostly internal practice games. They stuck with the bound rule anyway, because that's what they preferred. They would play fly rule games, but I'm not aware of any significant effort to change the rule back. I'm not aware of it. It might have happened, but I don't think there was ever any really serious effort. It just, the spectators seemed to prefer the game that way, and it just didn't seem like it was something that was ever going to be undone.
So with that, I think we'll put a stop to this video here. For anybody, you know, for members of the Lottie-Dahs, we hope this helps you out, gives you a little bit of clarity. You know, there's no learning like on the field, on-site learning, but at least this would give us a little bit of practice. I mean, we do anticipate this game is going to move faster than a traditional game. We've been really good. I mean, our games have been 2 hours or even sub 2 hours. I would not be surprised if this game is even 90 minutes, maybe even less than that, with the way outs could be made and how it could be done. So for the players, you know, I hope this helps. For spectators, we would encourage you to come. This is, you know, truly only once a year that we're going to be doing this. So if you're looking at thinking about something different, then this is definitely a cool instance to be able to see it a little bit differently. So Marcus, thanks for joining up with me here. Your expertise is always appreciated.
Well, thanks for the invite, and we'll see people on the field on Saturday.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We will see you hopefully Saturday, 1:30.